Excellent. Welcome, everybody. My name is Natalia Gorrono, and I'm the Senior Trade and Investment Director for Latin America for the Victorian government. My role and my team's role is to support Victorian companies operating in Latin America and help connect business ecosystems. Now, 2020 has been a stormy year for everybody, including those of us operating in the mining industry. Late last year, many Latin American countries were facing a wave of protests, which in Chile's case culminated in the country agreeing to rewrite its constitution. On top of that, the last 12 months have been particularly challenging, with the extra pressure of a global pandemic impacting the mining industry. So within this high pressure global environment, we thought it would be useful to stop and obtain an understanding of the political, regulatory and public perception risks that the mining sector has had to navigate during this year and is probably going to have to face into 2021. So today we're very lucky to be joined by two very experienced professionals who are going to share their thoughts with us on this panel. On one side and on the coalface, we have Nicolai Bakovic, who is the General Counsel for Teck, Chile. Teck Chile are currently building Quebrada Blanca, which is the biggest mining investment in Latin America. Prior to this, Nicolai was the General Counsel for Codelco, Chile's state-owned copper company. He is the lawyer from Universidad de Chile and holds an LLM from the London School of Economics and Political Sciences. He's a past president of the Australian Chile Chamber of Commerce, and he's a close friend of Australia. Thanks for joining us, Nicolai. We also are joined today by Oliver Wack, who's the General Manager for Colombia and the Andean region of Control Risks. Control Risks is a strategic consulting firm that helps their clients, who range from corporates to governments, to manage political, security and integrity risk. Oliver has recently relocated from Washington, DC to Bogota, where he leads Control Risks operations for Andean LATAM. His specific areas of expertise include political risk analysis, issues risk management, crisis-driven investigations, stakeholder engagement, corporate reputation risk management, amongst others. Oliver, thanks very much for joining us today. So we're going to split this panel into three main topics. I'll first ask Nicolai a question to help us understand how the past 12 months have impacted the mining industry. Nicolai's focus is going to be mostly on Chile. I will then ask Oliver to share his thoughts on the risks that are impacting the mining sector across Latin America. And I will close with a question focused on Chile's constitutional process and what risks they may pose to the mining industry. So without further ado, Nicolai, my question for you, keeping in mind that we have about 8 minutes. So Nicolai, how do you perceive that COVID-19 has impacted current and future mining operations? Most relevantly to this panel, have you observed any changes in regulatory frameworks or social perceptions towards mining?
All right, thank you for the question. So for those who are not aware, I mean, Latin America has been severely affected by COVID, and we have the unfortunate record of being the worst hit region in the world. If you look at the countries of the top 10, 6 of those top 10 are located in Latin America. We have Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. And that is not likely to change. By that, I mean countries that have faced the highest number of deaths per million inhabitants. So it has affected dramatically the region. And of course, mining is not an exception to that. If you look at what is happening today in Peru, you can see that in several months of this year, mining was severely affected, and it had a reduction in over 40% of the production of copper. I'm going to be focusing on copper because Latin America is, at least the Andean region, is clearly a copper and gold has copper and gold projects. So you see Peru, dramatic change in loss of production of 40%. And if you look at Chile, however, the situation is not as dire. And what we believe is going to happen today is there's going to be just a 5% reduction in copper production. Now, why is that the case? Well, the reason, I think, that is, notwithstanding that the population has suffered severely from COVID, the mining industry has followed, I would say, three main principles that have reduced the impact to the copper industry, and that's anticipation. I mean, the large copper producers of the world have a base in Chile, so when COVID landed, they had protocols in place that were immediately implemented at the mine sites. Discipline. I mean, I would say that most of the mining companies were extremely disciplined and implementing very strict and protocols to reduce the impact of COVID, and collaboration amongst mining companies, sharing best practices. So if we look at the production, we haven't seen any big impact. However, if we look at the projects that were being built, yeah, definitely, most of them had to suspend the works for at least 6 months. That's what happened to Quebrada Blanca project and also to other mining projects. Now, what's happening with new mining projects? Our ministry has indicated that of at least 23 projects will be delayed in their start of operation between 1.5 to 2 years. That's a lot. We're talking here about 50 million in investment. So if we look at new copper, we'll see that those projects will come into play much later than initially expected. Now, many of those attending this conference are in the met industry, and for them, the first half of the year, I'm talking primarily to mining suppliers, they also saw a sharp decline in their sales, particularly because mine operators restricted the access to the sites and deferred the investments and also the maintenance. So we saw a big decline in sales. However, as mines have reopened, we see that the end of the year is going to be looking pretty handsomely to those mining suppliers. Now, in terms of regulatory framework, what we're seeing here is that this has triggered a accelerated transformation process to many companies. And we've seen that most of people are working remotely. The staffing has reduced 30–40% of the mine sites, and managers and boards realize that they can do things differently than how they did in the past. So I believe that there is an interesting space here for METs, particularly in robotics, artificial intelligence, internet, because I think that managers and decision makers are beginning to think that you can do things differently, and it works. So I think that it's interesting for those looking into Latin America. We see that notwithstanding the COVID situation, in the next 5 years, Chile is going to be having investments in the order of 25 billion. So the situation is not gonna delay the major investment, and the government, I would say, has helped a lot. I mean, if you look, I mean, the Chilean government has helped a lot because they realize that copper is critical for the economy. Copper accounts for over 50% of Chilean exports and more than 10% of GDP, and is a strategic source of revenue in this tough times. Particularly when the state is going to be suffering a 10% deficit, fiscal deficit this year, considering the number of expenditures and expenses in all sort of areas. So the government has been very instrumental in facilitating mining companies to operate, and has considered it an essential service, which means that there are a number of controls that are not applied to mining, just provided that the mining players do have protocols in place. Now, the last part of your question, Natalia, was referring to social perceptions towards mining. And I would say that considering the magnitude of the problem that we faced in Chile because of COVID, mining companies had to be part of the solution, supplying medicines, equipment, beds, supplementary hospitals And communities have demanded that mining companies do need to be part of the solution. So I would say that there's no rejection to what the mining companies are doing. Quite on the contrary, communities, I think, believe that this is a moment when mining companies should be collaborating with communities and showing that they're here in the long term, and when things don't go as expected, they are there to support the communities and the country. So I think that by that I'm pretty much covering your question, Natalia.
Perfect. Thank you, Nicolai. You certainly have answered all three aspects. I really appreciate the on-the-ground perspective. And now for more of a regional perspective with a bit more of a focus on political risk. Oliver, my question to you. Prior and during COVID-19, we have observed social unrest and political reactions to this unrest. What risks do you think this might represent to mining industries across Andean LATAM?
Thanks, Natalia, and thanks for having me on the panel. So I guess the first point really to make for folks perhaps that aren't as familiar with Latin America and looking to do business here or invest in the region is that, as you say, some of the social unrest that we've seen does predate COVID and predates it quite significantly. We had this, we have this in waves in the history of Latin America in the last few decades, but the latest bout really sort of started mid to late 2019, and it was largely driven by a combination of factors whereby you had middle and lower classes coming together, workers groups, student groups, and others, really around sort of this point of, on the one hand, clamoring for maintaining the advances that they made over the last decade in terms of access to money, better lifestyle, education, and others. And at the same time, I would say growing expectations by those same people that they were, as they were advancing and becoming more entrenched in the middle class, in particular the middle class, not going to put up with...
Oliver, sorry to interrupt. Your audio is coming in and out a little bit. Could you just come closer to your mic?
Is that better?
Thanks.
Sure. So you have this expectation that you're not going to put up with deficient public services anymore. You're not going to put up with deficient housing, education, infrastructure, public transportation. And so you had in a couple of countries in the region, hikes in transportation prices all of a sudden really leading to the snowball effect and avalanche of social unrest. So we do think that with COVID-19, of course, some of that is going to continue and even exacerbate because you have the same questions around expectations, but you have those same people off the back of a global pandemic all of a sudden facing a much harder personal situation, economic hardship, etc. What is important, I would say, though, especially if you're looking at Latin America from the outside, is that as it impacts mining in particular, which is, of course, the focus of this conference and this panel, there's really only two things that I would say must be focused on. One is actually echoing Nicolai's comments, which is companies will be expected to do more, to contribute more. And at the same time, I think mining companies will have a very interesting situation because the same urban middle classes and student groups and others that are protesting to maintain quality of life and services are not the ones that are actually immediately in the areas where mining companies operate. So you will actually, to some extent, have some of those same groups wanting to see mining, wanting to see investment, wanting to see a boost to the economy, perhaps more so than the local communities that operate in and around mine sites. So this issue about expectations doing more, but at the same time, that division between urban and rural sort of groups is going to be absolutely critical. I also think it will exacerbate something that we had pre-COVID as well, which is weak governments. So even if before the pandemic, we had governments unable in some cases to pass major legislative reform to facilitate investment, that's, I think, only going to get worse because we don't see those weak governments now having the political capital to move ahead with some of these investments. Maybe just a final point that I will make, though, Natalia, is mining overall, and especially, again, as Nicolai was mentioning, the kind of mining that you largely see in Latin America, copper, silver, lithium, all those sort of interesting metals that are actually very critical in this point in time. I actually think overall the panorama is looking pretty good in terms of political risk, and the impact of the social unrest on mining is going to be somewhat limited, I would say.
Okay, that's encouraging to hear. Oliver, you mentioned that a lot of many parts of society are going to look at mining to boost the economy. So With that in mind, do you foresee that countries will change their mining taxation / royalty regulations in an effort to rebuild their government coffers?
I think that's a really interesting question, because you do have most governments, I would say, across the region, especially again off the back of the pandemic and the tremendous economic fallout it's had, looking to basically anywhere to kickstart the economy again, to get back to growth and get back to investments. I would say that in the vast majority of countries across the region, where you do have relatively high levels of political stability, somewhat limited, at least recent history of interventionist policies, we don't actually think that there's going to be a lot, at least by way of negative impact on regulatory and taxation framework, right? Countries and governments looking to extract money from the mining sector to be able to kickstart the economy or fill public coffers. If anything, you would probably perhaps see the opposite, which is more attractive regulatory frameworks in order to attract foreign investment. In some cases you will have, and I guess Bolivia is actually a good case in point, Argentina to some extent, where you do have a recent history of very interventionist policies. And I'd be a bit more pessimistic and probably say that in those countries you might actually see negative adjustments to the regulatory framework. I think what you will see in all countries across the region is that sort of divide. Not everybody is of the same view on whether energy, whether extractives, whether mining in particular, play a central role in restarting the economy. So you will have the more technocratically focused governments who are just looking at their coffers and saying, we need investment, heavily pushing for it. And then you'll have some people, especially on the left end of the political spectrum, very heavily pushing back and hoping for a green recovery, as it's being touted in many places across the world. Which is actually curious, of course, because as I was saying earlier, some of those same metals, copper, silver, lithium, and others that are being mined across the Andes are actually going to be fundamental to the green recovery elsewhere, looking at emerging markets in the US and in Western Europe in particular, in Asia. So there's a little bit of that dichotomy there. I would say overall, you are probably likelier to see less in terms of regulatory obstacles and hurdles to mining investors. The problem is going to be that because you have that disagreement, you have people, especially on the left side of the political spectrum, looking with a weary eye at more extractives activity. You are likely, in my view, to see more populist policies coming up on the horizon. So I think there will be a little bit of a trade-off there, but on average, I think it's actually looking pretty good for mining in particular, as a key source of revenue, and therefore as something that governments are going to try to focus on to attract foreign investment.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Oliver. I'm going to swing the conversation back to Chile, and I'm going to pose you both the same question. I'll kick off with Nicolai. Nicolai, what are your thoughts on the results of the constitutional plebiscite in Chile? So the decision to rewrite our constitution, and how do you think this might impact the mining sector?
So for everyone, it's clearly common knowledge that Chile has relied on its mineral resources since its colonial times. So Chile has been a mining country since the early ages, and will continue being so, thanks to the great deposit it's got, particularly in the north of Chile. And contrary to what happens to many other countries, the mining regulation, the fundamentals are contained in the constitution. So there you have that the concessionary holds a property right over the concession, and mining activity can be developed either by public or private entities. And if you see that most of the copper production, 2/3 of the copper production is done by private entities, and most of them are multinational. Now, so that's where mining sits in Chile. Now, if you look at the biggest demands from the communities and from the public as to what they want to see in the new constitution, big topics are health and education. That should be guaranteed for everyone. Property rights, interestingly, should be considered and should be contained as a fundamental right. So the majority of people is not against property rights. And that the state should compete with private entities on equal terms. So mining is not there as a top priority in terms of what needs to be changed, and therefore today it is hard to say whether the new constitution will change the rules to mining. Now, what is clear is that if the change, of course, is not beneficial for a new investment, that's going to be affecting the country, because most of the investment done in Chile are either in energy or mining. So how we craft the new constitution will definitely affect the investment and the mining industry. Now, something that to look into is that the next the next stage is to elect the people that will be the representatives for that Congress that will finally draft the constitution. So between now and April, that's when we will be electing those representatives. We will see which is their agenda, what are the subjects they want to raise, what they believe should be included in the constitution. So until then, it is hard to say whether there's going to be a big change in the rules of mining, but considering the importance of mining to Chile, I don't think that there's going to be any major change to the fundamentals, because we need investment. We depend heavily on copper, and will still depend on copper. And the main copper company, which is Codelco and AMI, they're not capable of developing all the projects that we have in this country. So the private sector needs to have a role to play.
Perfect. Thanks, Nicolai. I tend to agree with you. And I also think Chile is culturally and historically a minerals producing country. So I do agree that that's part of our identity, but we'll see what happens over the next few months. Oliver, the same question to you, perhaps with more of a risks perspective. What do you think?
Sure, I fundamentally agree. I think Chile will preserve its good business environment in some. It'll continue to be a place where folks want to do business and can do business successfully. I think, if anything, interestingly, this pandemic has probably taken a little bit of the sting out of the question as to how much the Constitution is going to change Chile as an investment destination, because as elsewhere in the world, with the economic implications of the pandemic, there is now a pretty far-reaching agreement all the way from the sort of right to the center left, at least, that Chile needs foreign investment. And because of its sort of mining DNA, that is a big part of where it's going to come from, where revenue for the public coffers is going to come from as well. I think the focus of the Constitution will be, as far as sort of concerns this conversation, social issues. I do think we will see reforms touching utilities, public services, health and education were mentioned as two key ones. I would agree with that. The pension fund system, of course, which is at the heart of a lot of the controversy, will likely also be reformed. And I do think we'll see more of a statist, more interventionist approach to the pension system. But I think the impact for mining is going to be far more limited. And I would agree with the assessment that Chile is a mining country. It has been a mining country, and it will continue to be a mining country. The one thing I will say is that because of the focus of this whole process on social issues, and I guess almost for the purpose of this conversation, a subset of that, which is environmental issues, there are likely going to be some implications in terms of political risk, not only of the Constitution, the constitutional process itself, but also of the broader sort of political currents around it. So on the one hand, I would say on the horizon, we already see that access to fresh water is going to be an increasingly hot conversation. And there might actually be, as part of this new constitution, changes in terms of access to water and water rights. There is also legislation out there about protection of glaciers, which will have potentially at least an impact on some projects. I don't think we'll see the worst case scenario whereby it was going to impact actually quite a few existing projects, but we do, I think, look at a more restrictive sort of environment on the upon the environmental side. Fundamentally, then, I think on the social side, what you will see is empowerment via this entire process, be it sort of in writing or just by virtue of what happened, of local communities, indigenous communities, among others. And so I think you will probably face, in some cases for new projects, increased timelines and costs to get licenses approved, but ultimately you're likely to get them approved and to be able to do business. So I think the key thing will be stability is going to be maintained. It will continue to be a good destination for investment and for business. And fundamentally, even if you have some of the changes that I'm referencing here that will affect the way mining companies can do business, you'll continue to have stability and predictability underlying all of the above. And so I think that's absolutely key for mining companies.
I agree. That's also an encouraging analysis. Since we've got a few more minutes, I'm just going to latch on to one of the points that you flagged, which I know I have also heard come up in conversation, which is water and water rights. And I'm going to throw this back to Nicolai, because I know that there are concerns around water usage. It's not just the mining industry that uses water, it's also agriculture. And I know that it's an issue that the mining industry has been preparing for many years. Nicolai, in Teck's case, I understand that Teck is focusing heavily on alternative ways to solve water use, including desalination. Do you think that the mining industry has already perhaps preempt this issue and is focusing towards solutions towards water so that it might not be as much of a risk moving forward?
Yeah, I think that if you look at the big projects that are underway today, they realize that the big way of getting the public consent and the environmental approval was to reduce the use of continental water. So most of the projects that you see today are using desalinated water, and there's a bill of law that is today sitting before Congress that is mandating that projects of a certain size will not be able of being approved by the environmental authority unless they include within the facilities a desalination facility, which is in line with the limited resources that we have, at least in the north of Chile, of water. And therefore, I think that the mining needs to adapt to an environment where water is very scarce, and public consumption is clearly a priority, and mining should be sitting in agriculture industry, of course, should be second in line.
Excellent. Thanks, Nicolai. Now, I understand that our time is coming short, so I'd like to thank you both very much for your thoughts. For anybody listening in on this panel, if you'd like, if you have further questions, please feel free to reach out to me or the IMARC team, and we'd be happy to connect you to Nicolai and Oliver to help answer those questions. Thank you both for your thoughts. I think the takeaway from this is, although we've had a stormy past 18 months that has been impacted by both COVID-19 and social unrest, it looks like, generally speaking, the prospects for the mining industry still look stable, and the outlook hasn't changed much across Latin America. So the traditional mining countries will continue being strong and using this as a base for their economy, and the rest will keep on developing as we pretty much have seen them. Thank you both very much for your time, and a big thank you to the IMARC team for letting us share our thoughts on this panel. I wish everybody a fantastic rest of the conference.